Whom the Gods Fear by Wdowski. Chapter 31. Back on the Polo's bridge, they were still receiving the transmission from the Marines' helmet cams. Rebecca was on the bridge observing the hall full of nude alien women. She oddly seemed upset when one of the Marines' helmet cams panned from one female to another, allowing Rebecca to get a glimpse of the two maidens wrapped around Glen and cooing into his ears. No wonder Demi decided never to return to Earth. Rubel commented before being interrupted by his censor officer. "Captain, we just picked up a runabout launch from the city they are outside of. It is en route to their position." Rubel signaled Glen's forearm comm. "Are your Marines' tactical displays picking up that you have a runabout heading your way?" "Thank you for the heads up. I will check." Glen responded into his forearm comm after pulling his arm free from the grip of the maiden on his left. He turned around to the Marines behind him. Noticing that one had dropped his pulse rifle, as each of the maidens had their tongues curled around fingers on each of his hands. "Marine!" Glen shouted at the man. The Marine got his wits back and picked up his weapon. "Sorry, Mr. Jaeger, it's just amazing what they can do with their tongues." "Is your tactical display picking up a runabout heading for us?" Glen asked. "I have it." The other Marine answered as the first Marine reset his helmet. "ETA is 5 minutes. Demi is coming to us." Stovall asked. "Someone that can pilot a runabout is." "I am sure it is not an A-er-shwaaaa." Glen responded, turning his attention to the male still kneeling before him. "Ask him if he notified Demi that we are here." The maiden on Glen's left retook hold of his left arm. "A-er-shwaaaa." The nude overseer responded, confused by Stovall's question. Glen turned to the Marines. "I think we should go back to the courtyard to greet the runabout." Glen gently broke, completely free of both maidens. The overseer seemed more confused that the 4 human males were breaking the maidens' holds on them and were leaving the hall, having only just arrived. It was clear that the overseer was completely unaware of the approaching runabout. Captain Mahan signaled in on Glen's forearm comm. "We can be there in 1." "Not yet, Captain. Stand by for now," Glen answered as they opened the closed double doors of the hall. The overseer, throwing on a tunic, followed them outside. The maidens stayed within the great hall. As they adjusted their eyes to the direct sunlight, they could see that beyond the fountain the columns of amphithars were off their knees, standing at attention once again. The Marines' visors darkened, automatically adjusting to the bright alien sun. They surveyed the heavens in the same direction until one of them spotted a craft to the north above the great hall, approaching them. With the sun still high in the day's sky, Glen used his left hand to shade his view, also spotting one of the Venture's former runabouts. "Those runabouts are only 4-seater," Glen explained to the other men. "At least we won't be outnumbered," the older Marine stated, unbuckling his gun belt with sidearm and offering it to Glen. Glen refused the weapon with a hand gesture. "Not necessary, Marine. Besides, it has been many years since I ever fired one." "It is like riding a bike, Mr. Jaeger. You never forget how to point and shoot." The older Marine responded, rebuckling his gun belt. "Let us just hope Demi is aboard that runabout." Still hoping his friendship still meant something to the living God. "Hope you are right, Mr. Jaeger," Stovall commented, unlashing his side arm for necessary quick draw. He had not brought his pulse rifle with him. They did not have to wait long for the runabout to begin kicking up dust between the fountain and the main hall as it came in for a landing. The men and the overseer stepped back up the steps to the great hall to avoid the heat and clouds of dust caused by the craft coming to a hover above them. Its engines roared with enough thrust to rattle the amphithars, causing them to break their ranks and fall back away from the machine. 3 shock-absorbent landing legs extended from the belly of the craft as it softly touched down. Ironically, the stabilizing fin of the craft still had the Jaeger Corp logo on it. Glen looked to his side, noting that the overseer had already prostrated himself face down onto the polished stone porch before the entrance. The amphithars reformed new columns facing the landed craft. They laid their weapons down beside them and were also prostrated with their faces in the dirt of the courtyard. The roar of the engines shut down once the craft was settled. Gull wing doors on each side of the craft unsealed and raised open. 2 humans from both sides climbed out of the craft armed with antimatter rifles. They stood, not at attention, yet at the ready as their boots hit the ground. One knocked twice on the hull of the craft, and Captain Demi climbed out of the open hatchway. His head was lowered as if not to hit the open gull-wing door above him. He was in his ship's captain's uniform as he stepped forward from the open hatch and placed his captain's hat on his head. He slowly raised his head to face Glen and the 3 Marines. He smiled, his eyes concealed behind a pair of mirrored sunglasses as he chewed on what seemed like a large, fat Cuban cigar. From around the other side of the runabout had climbed out the most beautiful A-er-shwaaaa woman any of them had yet seen. Demi placed the woman on his arm and walked up the steps to Glen and the others. His 2 crewmen stayed with the runabout. "Glen, good to see you. Didn't think you would find me, but good to see you nevertheless. Let's get out of this bleeding sun." Demi looked down at the overseer, who was still prostrating himself before Demi. Demi spoke to him in the local dialect. The overseer stood immediately and opened the doors of the great hall. He began to bark out orders at his harem of maidens inside. Demi, with the stunning A-er-shwaaaa female locked onto his arm, led them back into the great hall of the overseers. The naked maidens had already started to pull out a table from a back room and chairs, enough for them to seat Demi, Glen, Stovall, the 2 Marines, and Demi's A-er-shwaaaa female companion. As they sat around the table, the hall's females brought out jugs of local wine, bowls of fresh fruit, and plates of smoked alien fowl that had 4 wings each and 2 legs. "Did you have lunch?" Demi asked as he began filling his plate with food. "I actually skipped breakfast this morning. I am starving." "You grew a beard." Glen mentioned not taking part of the feast laid before them. Demi stroked the blonde and gray whiskers on his face. "Yeah, I did. Do you like it? The males here can't grow facial hair. The females love the novelty of it." His companion began stroking his beard. "So manly," she said in perfect English. "You should grow one too, Mr. Yeager." She looked across the table at Glen as she continued to stroke Demi's whiskers. "Your English is extremely good." Glen replied, "But you have me at a disadvantage." Demi put down the wing he was about to take a bite of. "How rude of me. May I have the honor of introducing my prime wife, A-er-shwaaaa. I first met her when she was still only 19 cycles. Once she turned 20 cycles, I married her. Their females are amazing. They blossom overnight into sexual maturity within a week of turning 20 cycles. The best part is until the day they die, they never lose their bloom." "So, you were involved with her when she was physically still an adolescent?" asked Stovall. "Of course not." Demi made a repulsive face, finally taking off his sunglasses, revealing his deep blue eyes. "I like women, not little girls. She came into my service as my translator at 19. It seems only the females can learn English, but only as children. They have photographic memories and pick up everything instantly. She learned the language in less than a month. The problem is once they turn 20 cycles, the males and females physically mature, but their brains seem to get hardwired. It is extremely difficult for them to retain any new complex knowledge after 20 cycles. It is like that old saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Well, with the A-er-shwaaaa, it is completely true. It is one of the reasons they are still stuck in a feudal society. Their history is actually much longer than ours. They should be centuries more advanced than we are now. Any innovations they do have are among their children. It was my motivation to send out a few of my maintenance robots to several of their schools. I had them reprogrammed to teach their young. They pick up English in only a month's time. Then I rotate the robots to other schools. Next year was planning to teach them advanced mathematics. If I only had more robots to teach them. Demi went back to eating his wing. "How did you know we were here?" Glen asked. "He has all the overseer's compounds under surveillance. There is still a concern that the Amphrathars may build up enough courage to stage a coup d'etat." A-er-shwaaaa answered. "They don't mind you marrying their females." The older Marine seemed intrigued, not able to take his eyes off the desirable females around them. "On the contrary, the A-er-shwaaaa do not have a jealous bone in their bodies." Demi answered the Marine. "It is considered rude for an A-er-shwaaaa male not to offer one of his wives to a guest to comfort him for the night. It is considered a great insult for guests to refuse their host's kind offer." "How do the women feel about this, having sex with strangers?" The older Marine became more interested. "A-er-shwaaaa women? They feed off sex. It's almost like a life force thing with them. Although, the males will never offer one of their wives under 30 cycles to another male. If a male does have an affair with a wife under 30 cycles, they have the offending male quartered." Quartered, the younger Marine did not understand. They tie the man's limbs to 4 different draft animals and then have the animals pull him in 4 different directions. Glen explained. Quartered. Yeah, saw it happen once while here. Appalling sight. Demi added. I do not understand. They offer their wives to you, and are insulted if you don't accept, but will have you torn apart by their plow animals if you do. The young Marine was even more confused. Demi looked at the 20-something-year-old Marine who had removed his helmet to eat. Only wives under 30 cycles you can't touch. Their females can only bear children for those 10 years. 20 cycles to 30. After 30, even though they are just as lovely as 20-year-olds, over 30 they are barren. So, you do not mess with a man's wife between 20 and 30 here. That way everyone knows who the fathers of any children they have are. It's not like they have DNA testing in this society. Oh, the younger Marine finally understood. A-er-shwaaaa are very sexual, so over 30 cycles, since there's no perplexity with children being born, they are very generous with their wives. Demi explained further. So you're planning to have children? Asked Glen of Demi. Would you believe I actually wanted to? You know me, Glen, the confirmed bachelor for life. But after the A-er-shwaaaa bloomed right before my eyes, for the first time in my life, I wanted to settle down and have a family. So any children on the way? Glen questioned, seeing that the A-er-shwaaaa did not seem as if she was with child. Afraid not. The A-er-shwaaaa are anatomically almost the same as human females in the sexual organ region, with one major difference. Yet we are clearly 2 different species. Humans and A-er-shwaaaa cannot conceive together. Many of my men have taken several A-er-shwaaaa wives. None have been able to reproduce with any of them. One major difference. The older Marine asked who had also removed his tactical helmet and was eating too. Demi looked at the A-er-shwaaaa and smiled before looking at the Marine. They have more than one tongue. One is in their mouth, just like us, the other is not. I will let your imagination fill in the rest. The Marine dropped his jaw and widened his eyes as his imagination filled in the rest. Demi smiled wider, confirming the older Marine's imagination. This is all very interesting, Captain Demi. Glen changed the subject. We now understand why you made yourself into a living god on this world. Actually, that was the A-er-shwaaa's idea. The living god bit. Of course, she came up with that idea when she was still only 19 cycles old. It was her idea. Glen questioned, looking at what he saw as only an overheated nymph that could not keep her hands and kisses off Demi. Yes, Glen. It was her idea. You have to remember, at the time when she was only 19 cycles, she was nothing like this. She had no interest at all in cardinal pleasures. Demi explained to Glen as he tried to eat and at the same time returned the A-er-shwaaa's affections. She ended up feeding him in between his sentences so he could talk to Glen. When we first arrived on this world, they were nothing more than warring city-states, with alliances that would form and break every time the winds changed. Most of the planet is uninhabitable even for the A-er-shwaaaa. Their cities and settlements hug the shores of the few freshwater seas and lakes on this world. Resources were scarce and infighting was unrelenting. So, you have brought peace and order to their world. Glen responded. Well, yes, I have. The crops from Shing 4 were perfect for this world. They were able to spread out and grow it in areas they never could before. Hunger ended in just one harvest. Demi motioned his head toward the main door of the hall. You saw those amphithars outside with their sharp, shiny sticks. They are their warrior elite, trained from the age of 6 cycles in combat and survival skills. Like the children of ancient Sparta. Glen stated. Yeah, very much like that, but none of that man-boy love stuff the ancient Greeks were into. Here it was just being warriors. The amphithars do not even take wives. They believe it helps keep their aggressive edge, being celibate. The overseers are the sons of overseers, and the former lords that ruled each city-state were the sons of lords. It is in their upbringing to be at each other's throats. As I mentioned before, they find it extremely difficult to learn new tricks after 20 cycles of age, which is the reason for your education program of the young. Glen stated. Yes, you get it. Demi seemed pleased that Glen understood him. By creating this living god status for me and the rest of my crew, we have for the first time in their history unified all their city-states and stopped all the infighting. It is true. The A-er-shwaaaa looked at Glen. The great Lord Demi has brought peace to our world for the first time ever. I am glad to hear you have such noble motives, Captain Demi. Glen sat up straight in his chair, not seeming impressed with Demi's justifications. Since you are so interested in the cause of peace, you will have no issue returning to the Xing system with us to stop an interstellar war. Interstellar war? Demi asked. Your action of returning the venture back on autopilot, empty, has cascaded into a series of events that have brought Earth and Xing to the brink of war. Lives on both sides have already been lost, but it will be nothing compared to the carnage that will happen. That is, if we do not stop it. Glen's serious tone sucked all the pleasantries out of the air. Before Demi could reply to the A-er-shwaaaa whispered in his ear. His eyes closed, and he began to breathe heavily as her whispers turned into kisses. Once she stopped kissing him, his eyes opened, and in a post-orgasmic daze. He finally spoke. That is not my problem. That is not your problem. Stovall was shocked by the captain's reply to Glen. That is not his problem. The A-er-shwaaaa glared at Stovall. Wdowski Demi is needed here. We are his people now. She kissed Demi's ear again. Is that not right, my love? Yes, I am needed here. He dryly answered. Very well then. Glen stood up from the table, stunning everyone. No point in carrying on this conversation. We'll return to the polo. Mr. Yeager. Stovall was shocked by Glen's dismissal of the situation. Glen turned then to his forearm and spoke into the device. Captain Mahan, please have one of the shuttles come to retrieve us. Aye, Mr. Yeager. Mahan's voice spoke through the four-armed worn personal computer. The Marines followed Glen's lead and stood up, placing their tactical helmets back on and slinging their pulse rifles over their shoulders. Stovall stood up reluctantly, still questioning Glen. Mr. Yeager, what of stopping the war? We have the recordings now of Captain Demi explaining his disappearance, proving that he and his crew are alive and well. It should be enough proof to those in power that the Xingese are not holding him and torturing him for Earth's secrets to attack us. Glen spoke again into his forearm comm. Captain Rubel, I assume you picked up our conversation? Aye, Mr. Yeager. We also have the images from the Marines' tactical helmet cams of him disembarking from the runabout with his men. Officially time-coded and everything. So, Captain, sorry Wdowski Demi, we will leave you to rule your world and playing God. Glen said his goodbyes to Demi, who sat flabbergasted by Glen's response. Glen and his men walked to the exit when Demi finally stood up, drawing his sidearm. I am afraid I can't let you just leave. Glen stopped and turned around to face Demi, who was aiming his sidearm at Glen. Afraid? Glen asked. Who would a god be afraid of? One of the Marines reacted by putting himself between Glen and Demi with his rifle drawn. Behind me, Mr. Yeager. The other Marine also moved to protect Glen. That is not an antimatter weapon, Captain Demi. It is useless against our body armor. True, but the gunshot will bring in my men who are armed with antimatter rifles. Rifles that can cut through your body armor, like hot coal through snow. Demi, Captain Mahan has been listening in on my forearm comm. He's already on his way with both shuttles with a full squad of Marines. Glen answered. Put the weapon away, before anyone gets hurt. My 2 men outside can take down both of your approaching shuttles with 1 shot each. You will be dead before that happens, responded the older Marine as he aimed his weapon, projecting a red dot between the eyes of Captain Demi. You are forgetting, Marine, I also have at least 1,000 loyal amphithars just outside that door, with pikes that never run out of rounds, unlike your pulse rifles. If you kill me, you will not be able to get out of here alive. Glen walked between the Marines. Using his hands, he lowered both of the weapons. Demi, what is it you want from us? I tried to cover our tracks. I didn't want you to find us. Demi responded. We cannot have you bringing others of your kind to our world. The A-er-shwaaaa stood up, standing beside Demi. You think killing us will prevent that? Glen responded to her. Killing us will only lead to more of my people coming here, in force. Demi holstered his weapon and turned to her. He is right. Killing him will not prevent them from coming. She moved in close to Demi, rubbing her body up against him. You promised they would not find our world, Wdowski. Frightened Demi looked to Glen and pleaded. You cannot tell them about us, Glen. Demi, that is not possible. The fact that you are alive and well can possibly prevent millions of deaths. "A-er-shwaaaa, you must protect your people who worship you." The A-er-shwaaaa placed her hand on his cheek and gently guided his eyes back to hers. "You need to protect our love." "I will," he answered her. "I will not let anyone hurt us." He turned back to Glen. "Go, Jaeger, but don't return. Tell them this world is off limits." "I will tell them what you have said." Glen turned to the other men, speaking to them under the roar of the engines of one of the Polo's shuttles touching down outside. "I recommend we go now before he changes his mind." The Tartar one touched down in the courtyard beyond the fountain. Its landing had forced the Amphithars to back off, and a party of Marines moved towards them with Captain Mahan at their lead. "Captain Demi?" Mahan asked Glen. "He is still inside. Back to the shuttle we are leaving." Glen ordered the Marine captain. "Aye, Mr. Jaeger." Glen approached the men guarding the runabout. "Robert's A-er-shwaaaa. Good to see you both well. You men can return with us." "Is good to see you again, Mr. Jaeger, but our place is here with Captain Demi." A-er-shwaaaa answered him. "We all have wives and homes here." Roberts nodded in agreement. Glen knew it was not going to end well for these men. He decided not to try to persuade them to come with them. Glen figured it was best they get out of this situation as quickly as possible. He wasn't really sure why Demi was even letting them go. He followed Mahan and the others back to the shuttle. They climbed on board as his 2 Marine escorts were the last to board. As the shuttle hatch closed, he could see the Amphithars with their shiny pikes regroup in ranks and begin approaching the craft. The shuttle took off, shooting off into the southern sky towards A-er-shwaaa's farm.